But yeah, I've always had the problem with doctors where, like, they ask you about, do you smoke cannabis? You say yes, and they're like, how much do you smoke? And I'd always say, oh, like 1.5 to 2 grams a day. And they'd say, yeah, well, I don't, how many spliffs is that? And I'd go, well, I don't smoke spliffs. I smoke bongs. They'd be like, oh, well, how much, like, if it were spliffs, if it were joints, what, like, how much would you be smoking? And I'm just there like, oh, you useless fucking prick. And then that's why my current GP, when he asked about cannabis usage, and I was like 1.52 grams, he was like, okay. And I was like, you're not going to ask me anything else? You know, that was the start of a good relationship. Just, okay. Have you been using it for a while then? Yeah. Okay. And you experienced all your negative symptoms before you started using it? Yeah. Okay, cool. Like, those doctors do exist. They just come from Portugal. They don't come from the UK. I just want to explain to this person as well. One major common thing I noticed with anyone who spreads misinformation is they use some real info mixed with buzzwords, phrases to get your attention, and make it seem like it's true, so it fits their narrative. And that is part of the fallacial argumentative technique known as the Gish Gallop. Learning these techniques, learning these rhetorical debating techniques is sadly important in this day and age. It didn't used to be, but now that everyone on the right is obsessed with debate, we do need to be able to debate them, because it seems to be the only form of conversation that they respect or whatever. It's absurd. They've set the rules. They've made this rule being like, if you don't meet us in the intellectual field of debate, then we won't listen to you. But we're then going to misuse the intellectual field of debate as heavily as we possibly can. So to use my mental health issues. Yeah. I had that forever. I had that absolutely forever until my current doctor, who, we chatted about it, and he was like, well, it's obvious, Peter. You've been using, I understand, you've been using it as a medication for years. And I was like, I literally broke down crying when he said that to me, because the affirmation, the confirmation, that you're not crazy moment, I get it. I'm hearing you. You've had your issues your whole life, and cannabis has helped. Actually, getting that from a doctor literally made me just burst into tears and start crying, because I was like, oh my God, you're listening to me. To be heard was so powerful. Actually, rhetoric used to be taught a lot in schools, and now East America isn't something taught anymore. Rhetoric used to be taught like English. Yeah, and that's why so many debate lords like Ben Shapiro exist. We don't give shit about debate in the UK whatsoever, at all. And so we learn nothing about these debate techniques. We learn nothing. We learn about rhetorical language. We learn about writing styles. We do learn about speech. We learn a lot about speech making. We're more interested in like making speeches in the UK, and you have to write speeches a lot of the time during like GCSE and stuff. But you never have to debate ever. Debate's too much like argument, which could be too much like fighting. Our schools, like in the 90s and early 2000s, banned anything that could have kids hurting themselves. Like every school banned Bulldog, fucking Bulldog, like the national game of England, the national playground game of every school in England got nationwide banned. And I'm pretty sure loads of schools still play it now, and they just ignore the ban. But literally, Bulldog got banned. And if you don't know what Bulldog is, it's a game where you've got like 50 people standing on one side of the field, and you have like 10 people in the middle of the field, and those 50 people have to run to the other side of the field. But if the 10 people in the middle, it's their job to try and like pin as many of them as they can, tag as many of them as they can, and then the ones that they tag join them in the middle to take down the rest. It's a great fucking game. It's so fun. When I got my ADHD diagnosis, I cried because it felt like finally being seen. Yeah, and then you had a doctor come along and rip that away from you, and I can't even imagine that. I totally understand you, dude. Again, same as when, like, the PTSD, the bipolar confirmations from good psychiatrists were life-changing. It's because debate is so influential to American politics and stuff. You are obsessed with it there. And debate is important because that's what stops people drawing their guns on each other, I guess. We don't need the debate so much here because we don't have the guns. It doesn't matter if it ends up in a bit of fisticuffs. So the Gish Gallop is a term for rhetorical technique in which a debater attempts to overwhelm an opponent by excessive number of arguments without regard for the accuracy or strength of those arguments. Okay? During a Gish Gallop, a debater confronts an opponent with a rapid series of many specious arguments, half-truths, and misrepresentations in a short space of time, which makes it impossible for the opponent to refute all of them within the format of a formal debate. So it was possible for that woman to refute what that other woman was saying because it was in the form of a TikTok video for her to just say no, no, no. But you can see how that would completely fail in a debate. That woman just laid out all those things there in her turn of the debate. You know, that other woman would have spent 2 minutes laying out 100 things that now need to be individually broken down, discredited, and defeated. And that is quite literally impossible. Straw manning is fucking easy to beat. You just say, stop straw manning me. Here's my Iron Man. To fight a straw man, you just propose an Iron Man. Straw manning is easy, and everyone does it as their first technique, along with the Gish Gallop to try and beat people. But yeah, the Gish Gallop is the heart of the filibuster. It is a pain. The technique wastes an opponent's time and may cast doubt on the opponent's debating ability for an audience unfamiliar with the technique. That's the other thing. Where so many audiences now are unfamiliar with this technique, they see somebody Gish Gallop and they're like, whoa, they know so much. They're smart. And then they see somebody only refute one of those things and they're like, well, you're an idiot. The person who threw out 100 facts is the one I believe. That's how Ben Shapiro argues so much with his let's say. You know, let's say the ocean levels rise 5 meters. Well, let's say it doesn't matter because let's say those people will just sell their homes to people who want to buy homes under the sea. A red herring is different than a straw man, yeah? A red herring is a narrative technique within storytelling and movies. A red herring is a false plot point, or so a red herring is that guy that you spend the whole movie thinking is the murderer, but he isn't the murderer. I don't know why you were using that term in debates. Like a red herring is a movie narrative technique, as far as I know. I think people meant straw man. So a straw man is where you create a fallacious straw man. So we could be debating about it's a false equivalency is what a straw man is. It's the definition of a false equivalency. So you're saying that this thing here is the same as this thing here. Now that occurs often with false equivalencies. It's like me saying the grinder economy is the same. It's just like the lighter economy when they're not. But a straw man would be to say the grinder economy is just like the computer economy. And then to try and explain why with all this bullshit, fallacious shit. Your teacher told you to say red herring. No. Oh no. This is the problem. This is why teaching this stuff at school level is very silly, because teachers teach so much shit wrong. A red herring is a clear piece of information which is or is intended to be misleading or distracting. This book is fast-paced, exciting, and full of red herrings. So maybe, I guess you could say, oh, okay, so a red herring fallacy. Okay, so maybe your teacher was using something correctly there. This fallacy consists in diverting attention from the real issue by focusing instead on an issue having only a surface relevance to the first. So yes, it's a false equivalency still. Wow, Dad, it's really hard to make a living on my salary. Father, consider yourself lucky, son. It was much harder to consider yourself lucky, son. Why, when I was your age, I only made $40 a week. Yeah. It's that thing that we get from our parents all the time. It's like, geez, it's impossible to buy a home these days. Like, I'm only making like $7 an hour. Consider yourself lucky. When I was a kid, I only made $2 an hour. And it's like, yeah, and when you were a kid, that $2 was worth $15 now. That would be a red herring, but a better term would just be to say false equivalency. So false equivalence is a logical fallacy in which an equivalence is drawn between two subjects based on flawed or false reasoning. Which is just a much false equivalency encompasses that red herring technique, but nobody would ever say the red herring technique. I've never heard anyone say it. I've literally never heard anyone say it, which is why it really shocked me, because it's just what you think. Like if you're talking about red herring, you think about a false plot point in a movie. It's just what you think of. Comparing apples to oranges, the fallacy is committed when one shared trait between two subjects is assumed to show equivalence, especially in order of magnitude, when equivalence is not necessarily the logical result. Ergo, your dad earning $40 a week compared to you earning minimum wage now, you know. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill is no more harmful than when your neighbour drops some oil on the ground when exchanging his car's oil. Comparisons between things differing by many orders of magnitude. They're both living animals that metabolize chemical energy, therefore there's little difference between having a pet cat and a pet snail. The equivalences and factors that are not relevant to the animal's suitability as pets. Like, it just encompasses a lot more, the technique of false equivalence. You see? Does that make sense? We do learn. So yeah, and the best way to beat a false equivalency, or when somebody starts straw manning you, and a straw man is the technique that creates a false equivalency, you know. So a straw man isn't necessarily what's being done here, but the straw man is the part of the false equivalency. So the false equivalency has been made, but the straw man is the Deepwater Horizon spill, or actually the straw man here would be the car's oil. You know, there is no equivalence between those things. One of them is a straw man. They're not a reasonable thing to form the argument from. It is a very weak place to form the argument from, a man made of straw. Yeah, it's quite interesting how these people on the right do this stuff. They know these techniques and then they purposefully abuse them. That's why I have grown to really despise the Stephen Crowders, Ben Shapiro's, and Jordan Petersons of this world. It's what made me at first engrossed by their argument style, their ability to win every debate, and then I realised it was pure sophistry. Nothing but pure fucking sophistry at its core. And that just wound me up completely. The sophist, or the sophists, was a teacher in ancient Greece in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. Sophists specialized in one or more subject areas such as philosophy, rhetoric, music, athletics, and mathematics. They taught arete, virtue or excellence, predominantly to young statesmen and nobility. They were all about virtue and excellence and how to use philosophy, rhetoric, music, and physical prowess over others in order to defeat them in the intellectual school of debate. Who do these people remind you of? The sophists, predominantly to young statesmen and nobility. Since the times of Homer, it commonly referred to an expert in his professional craft, charity. But later, it became to mean far worse things. So that was it in the 5th century. But so in the 5th century, the sophists were the teachers. They were the philosophers. They could be described as teachers, philosophers, having travelled about in Greece teaching the students various life skills, particularly rhetoric and public speaking. The main things they taught the young Greek men was the ability to form bullshit arguments in public. These were useful qualities of the time, during which persuasive ability had a large influence on one's political power and economic wealth. If you could convince people you were right, you made money back then. Oh, not much changed. Athens became the centre of the sophist activity due to the city's freedom of speech for non-slave citizens and its wealth of resources. The sophists as a group had no set teachings, and they lectured on subjects that were as diverse as semantics and rhetoric. God, don't you love those people who spend all their time debating semantics and rhetoric? It's ontology, Ben Shapiro, and epistemology, Ben Shapiro. Most sophists claim to teach arete, excellence or virtue, blah, 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 blah. 1st century AD. From the 1st century AD, the second sophistic, philosophical and rhetorical movement was the chief expression of intellectual life. The term second sophistic comes from Philostratus, who, rejecting the term new sophistic, tracing the beginnings of the movement to the orator Aeschines in the 4th century BC. But its earliest representative was really Nicetas of Smyrna in the 1st century AD. Unlike the original sophistic movement of 5th century BC, the second sophistic was little concerned with politics, but it was to a large degree to meet the everyday needs and respond to the practical problems of Greco-Roman society. It came to dominate higher education and left its mark on many forms of literature. Lucian himself, a writer of the second sophistic, even calls Jesus that crucified sophist. So that was the second sophistic way. But the important thing is Plato came along. And there's only small portions of the sophist writings survived. They're mainly known through the works of Plato. And Plato fucking hated them. Plato's dialogue presents as generally hostile views on the sophist's thought, due to which he is largely responsible for the modern view of the sophist as an avaricious instructor who teaches deception. Plato depicts Socrates as refuting some sophists in several of his dialogues, depicting sophists in an unflattering light. It is unclear how accurate or fair Plato's representation of them may be. However, Protagoras and Prodicus are portrayed in a largely positive light in Protagoras, and they are sophists as well. So the point is, the sophists existed just to debate, according to Plato, who we get most of our history on that time in the world from. They existed to debate, to argue, to not necessarily be right, but to exist and argue and argue. And nothing has changed, effectively. They still use the technique of sophistry of just rhetoric, which means bullshit. It's amazing. Nice one, Lex. Yeah, they didn't care if what they were saying was right. What they cared about was maintaining political power, wealth, and status. They didn't actually care if what they said was right or helped people. They cared that it got people to support them and give them political backing. Okay? So all you had to do to be a sophist was, set up a bench in front of one of the local Athenian universities and debate some young debate lords at the university. Get them to change your mind, not have your mind changed. Blow the minds of the assembled crowd by how impossible it is to change your mind with your Gish Gallops and your rhetorical argument techniques, with your pure sophistry. And then you gain political power and backing. And nothing's changed for 2,000 years. And this is the real reason why, even though democracy has been seen in various places around the world for so long, and even though American democracy is actually based nothing upon Greek democracy, even though the Americans took their entire fucking political structure from the Native Americans who inhabited America before they fucking murdered all of them, right? Despite that, that's why they still fap off to the Greek ideals. Because your politicians are sophists. Dante wants to go. And you can say sophists, but I always find that's like you're attacking somebody called Sophie or something, so I say sophists. Yeah, sick, Lex. Yeah, sick, dude. I'm Chief Green Special. Legs. I'm Ambon. Right. Dude, right. This is fuck yes for Lexstream. Fuck yes for Lexstream. Dude. You realise that's because you obviously killed it this last weekend, right? You obviously fucking killed it. That's awesome. That's amazing. Dude. That's possibly the coolest job title. That may be head of smoke, chief of smoke division, chief green specialist. Oh my god, damn. Yeah, no, the history is fantastic, right? I love classics and everything. The sad fact is our culture has just been rehashing this 2,000 years without a thought for whether it's still relevant or needed or not. Yeah, well, it was. The thing is, the worst part is how it has been abandoned in places and then sort of integrated into our society, and that's what I really hate.
So fun ball games and egalitarian culture aside, the actual government of the Iroquois is kind of incredible. The multinational peace agreement was a huge deal because nothing of the sort had ever been done before in the Americas or anywhere else. The fundamental principles of the Iroquois government, being a collection of small local states united in peace under a binding federal roof, were entirely new. But still, that all might sound familiar to you because there's this cool new nation called the United States of America, and, well, The proof's kind of in the name. This fact often goes unacknowledged, but the United States was founded on the Federalist governing principles of the Iroquois, and the Constitution is, in many ways, a codified version of the Great Law of Peace. And that's not just crackpot revisionism. See, a little-known gentleman's club called, Congress officially recognized in 1988 that the structure of the US government is directly modeled after the Iroquois Confederation. And this next claim isn't properly substantiated historically, so grain of salt, but according to modern-day Iroquois, several members of the Confederation were present during the Continental Congress and kept upstairs so that when the American founders had a question about something, they would just run upstairs and ask what the Iroquois did to resolve that given
trip with the absolutely perfect bullet pointing. And yeah, before I go, I'll put the fakers back on for you guys who have just joined to see, because they were so mad and they're only short.
problem. If you ask me, it shows. I think it's really cool that the American founders took so much from a system that clearly worked and employed it to such good effect in what became the American government. We often like to think of the Constitution as a revival of the great democratic ideals of ancient Athens or Rome, but all of the capitals, stone columns, and Greco-Roman architecture really just establishes an aesthetic. The real bones of the US government comes from the Iroquois. In the 16th
And that is one of the most sick, perverse twistings of history ever. White people murdered, raped, destroyed the land, destroyed the animals, murdered all the bison, all the buffalo, destroyed the animals, all the land, cut down the trees, murdered 98% of the Native American population. It's like the greatest genocide. If you think Hitler did hard work, no, it doesn't come close to the Native American genocide, because of the fact that they were disparate peoples and we were always fighting small tribes or whatever. We never fully appreciated actually how large a people they were in our written histories, and we purposefully ignored how large a people they were, because to acknowledge that would be heartbreaking. But the reality is the genocide of the Native Americans was probably close to 6 or 7 million people murdered.
1600s, the Iroquois expanded outwards in a series of conflicts called the Beaver Wars. Now, unlike the Great Australian Emu War of 1932, this wasn't a war.
This picture sums it up for you. Like, oh, our brave men were surrounded on all sides by hordes of Native Americans. They fought bravely back with their guns and their full armor, their chainmail. That's something we never show, right? With like Native American war films and stuff, something we never show in those old things, like the 1600s, 1700s shit. You never show the fact. You realize the Brits, they were still Brits, the new Americans. They were wearing armor, they were wearing chainmail. Some of them would have full plate, be on horseback, and have guns. Like Native Americans wearing leathers, skins, bow and arrow versus people. And the bow and arrows weren't made for hunting people. The bow and arrows were made for hunting animals. They didn't have the penetrative power to even get through a millimeter of fucking reinforced, hardened, tempered steel. Like, we had men on horseback charging at them with swords, lances, and guns and cannons. Like, no, the brave men surrounded on all sides.
Centuries fall.
How can you don't get Alex Jones and Alex James mixed up? That's a crime. How dare you? How dare you mention Blur in the same sentence as Alex fucking Jones? How dare you bring up one of my all-time favorite Britpop grunge bands in the same sentence as Alex Jones? Next you're going to bring up Radiohead in the same sentence as Alex Jones? That's a crime in and of itself. Lives in an house, very big house in the country.
Iroquois Confederation. One famous feature of the law was how forward-looking it was. No law could be passed without giving specific consideration to how it will affect each of the next 7 generations. Which, just, damn, that's really cool.
How beautiful a law is that?
Also lived in a genuinely just consideration to the law was how forward-looking it was. No law could be passed without giving specific consideration to how it will affect each of the next 7 generations. Which, just, Damn, that's really cool.
Why don't we do that? Why doesn't it essential? Why doesn't it become like that's just smart. We do stuff, we like put mandates in place for like 20 years. No, no laws can be passed without considering how it will be affected, how it will affect the next 7 generations of man. Not starting a war without considering how it will affect the next 200 years of human history. Right? Like, thinking of consequences properly before implementing stuff, discussing it properly, and not in the sense of, oh, how will it affect the next year, the next 2 years, the next 10 years? No. How will this affect people 200 years from now? That's how to think.
The Iroquois also lived...
It's that same way of thinking that the ancient Greeks did have of plant an apple seed so that your grandchildren may live under its shade.